Well, first of all, thank you, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to be one of the presenters and to be part of the TAD Summit 2023. Really appreciate the opportunity. I am now with a company known as Caller ID Reputation. As Alan mentioned just a moment ago, I've been on board for a couple of months now. Previously, I was on board with UMail when I presented at the TAD Summit last year. So just a bit of an introduction, because we're going to get into gaining a competitive advantage through managing telephone number reputation. And so what does that mean? Well, from Caller ID's reputation, since we provide a SaaS-based solution that helps one to get a sense for what is going on with their telephone numbers when they're placing calls. And of course, that's something that's very important to anybody in the ecosystem, but I would say in particular, if you have a CPaaS platform or UCaaS or CCaaS operations, at the end of the day, you want your calls to be answered. So it's all about making sure that when you're placing calls that you have the best opportunity possible for the person on the other end to actually answer the call. So this SaaS-based solution that we provides visibility into what's actually happening when calls are placed with your numbers. In other words, are they blocked, or do they provide, or do they experience adverse call labeling, or do they come through as normal? We also provide managed services to help remediate situations where they're not coming through as normal. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing here. So one of the things we're going to talk about first is call treatment, which is what is happening at the consumer UI level, what is happening at the handset. All right, so the first two categories of things is just simply blocking versus labeling. So blocking, there's the cover that the FCC provides in the United States for reasonable analytics, which means if you are pretty confident, very confident, that something unlawful is happening, you have the ability to actually block a call. So there's no opportunity if the call is blocked for the terminating carrier to even have a chance to label it, let alone let the call go through. And so that's a very solemn type of a thing. You got to be really sure that something should be blocked if you're going to do that. Labeling is much more common. And the type of thing that we're seeing today is more or less a knee-jerk reaction to label pretty much everything that is a new telephone number or has certain behaviors that are indicative of problematic calls. But what's happening, though, sadly, is some of the legitimate businesses are getting wrapped up in this, where they are getting their calls adversely treated as well. And so that is one of the main reasons why Caller ID Reputation exists, is to point this out when this happens and to provide tools to our customers, which tend to be everything from SMB, small to medium-sized business, the proverbial Joe the plumber, all the way up to large enterprise and everything in between. Provide tools to have visibility into knowing when that happens and having a sense for why that's happening, and then also tools to fix it. So next slide here. One of the things that we see is different types of call treatment. One could be positive labeling, like nothing happens at all, nothing bad. Another one would be negative labeling, which I referred to earlier, and then perhaps completely unlabeled. So consumer behavior and adverse call labeling, spam and scam likely. The bottom line is that consumers they tend to avoid calls like that. I would say consumers don't answer calls too much today at all, but certainly if they see these kinds of labels, that they're just not going to answer. So how much is that happening? On this next slide, we've got some stats. We're seeing, in terms of impact of negative telephone number reputation, 87% consider unidentified numbers to be fraudulent. So if it's a number that's not in your handset, if it's something that you just don't recognize, and or if there's adverse call labeling, then you know, consumers are going to stray away from that. So that's, again, that's the reason why we exist, and we work with CPaaS providers, UCaaS, CCaaS, to help identify this. So how do we do this? We've got something that we refer to as a device cloud, which is literally hundreds of telephones. These are real live telephones and real service plans where we place phone calls. We place phone calls on behalf of our business customers that subscribe to our service. And essentially, it's kind of like we're spoofing, but we're doing this in a legal sense. So we have deals worked out with network providers so that when they see these types of calls, because obviously from a start shaking perspective, they would not look correct. They would be something that could be blockable, like I was mentioning earlier, that you wouldn't want to let them go through, or they get C attestation at best, or most likely they get blocked. Instead of doing that, because we've got these agreements with network providers, these calls do go through, and then we can see what actually happens at the handset level on iPhone, on Android, on all the major network providers in the United States, Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, US Cellular, others. We can see what's actually happening. And this is very helpful for our customers because they can become aware if they actually have a problem. And this would correlate very highly with them not having very good call answer rates. So then the next question to ask is, well, why is this happening? And now this is somewhat of a rhetorical question for most people because they just simply don't have visibility into it. But even if they do and they realize that they're getting this adverse treatment, then they still might wonder, well, why is this happening? Is it just, it's just a mystery? We don't know what's going on with these analytics providers and why they're doing this. They have their proprietary algorithms, which they just don't share the details of that. But what they do share with caller ID reputation, because we have deals with them, is the actual scoring. How they see these numbers, how they score them. So we've got a variety of data points, and I've shared some of those here on the screen. T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, Email is one of them, which is my former employer. The Real Number DNO from Somos is one of our providers, and 9 others. And this list is growing. We're adding new data providers all the time. So it's kind of a very effective 1-2 punch approach where the what is actually happening on the handset, and the why is these data points, which would allow one to discern, is there perhaps an error? Am I getting spam likely show up or scam on an unjustified basis? Or is there some good reason for that? And we have a managed service at Caller ID Reputation, which basically it's the ability for us to act on behalf. We have a letter of authorization with our customers to act on their behalf. We reach out to the analytics engines and we get these things changed if merited to do so. So if the data proves that there's really no good reason for this type of labeling to happen, then we'll get it fixed very rapidly with the analytics engines, most notably First Orion, Haya, and TNS. And that would be for T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon, respectively. And so on this slide here, it's basically the dashboard. I know this is a bit of an eye chart, probably can't see it very well, but this is essentially the SaaS-based solution, the web-based portal that one of our customers would see, and this would enable them to again get this answer this question, the insight of what, why, why is this happening? But not only the what, but why is it happening? So now let's talk a little bit about managing number reputation. What can we do to optimize the reputation? And so, by the way, I apologize if these slides are kind of like jumping. There seems to be a bit of a lag between when I click on it and when it shows up, at least on the streaming on YouTube, too. Maybe you see it sooner than I do. So I'm on the slide right now, reputation management. So this is all about reconciling that what and the why. What are we seeing on the handset, and why are we seeing it? And what we're looking for is certain behaviors that may be indicative of something that would cause this adverse call labeling. So we look for a variety of things. We look for things like the Federal Trade Commission's telemarketing and sales rule, and this would be a form of content-based analytics where we're literally looking at a transcript that's taken from the pre-recorded audio that's left behind on a honeypot, or maybe when somebody calls somebody like Email, again, one of our suppliers. We look at those transcripts and we look for very specific things, and I can share some of those things with you right now. We look, for example, does the caller identify the company that they're calling from? Car warranty is a perfect example, and one of the reasons why they're unlawful is because you can't just leave behind pre-recorded audio that says, this is Jerry calling about your car warranty. You have to say this is Ford Motor Company or whomever. You also have to provide a valid telephone number that the call party can use to be able to opt out. These are things that the FTC says in the telemarketing sales rule. And so if those are absent, it's highly likely that one of these analytics engines is going to mark that particular telephone number poorly, and that could be one of the causes why there's adverse call labeling. It could even be blocked for that reason. And so these are the kinds of things that we look at. And I would note here that it's possible that in some cases your calls go through just fine, as evidenced by our dashboard with our testing, because we use a certain call path there. But it's also possible that on another call path, the calls could actually be blocked. We all know with voice over internet protocol that we use this thing called least cost routing, LCR, and based on the types of routing you have in place to make calls go through as efficiently and as cost effective as possible, that there could be a different route from one day to the next, or even one call to the next. So it's possible that a call could go through an intermediate network operator where it's actually blocked on one path, but not on another. So that's the other type of thing that we look for and that we offer on a managed service to our customer, is to let them know if we believe that some of their calls can be blocked on certain paths based on what we see on the analytics. Again, the example I gave is a good one. If the FTC's TSR is not being followed. So I just mentioned one of the types of things that we look at, but we really look at a variety of different behaviors that shape the telephone number reputation. And again, from an analytics engine perspective, there's a lot of things that go into the algorithm that are proprietary, that they just are unable or unwilling to share. But we can look at some things that are relatively deterministic. Some things like DNO I mentioned earlier. So do not originate would be things like, from a big picture perspective, is it an unallocated number? Is it a NAMPA, a North American Number Plan number? It's a legitimate number, but it's been unallocated, meaning that it has not been provided to a carrier. Even once a number is provided to a carrier, perhaps it hasn't been assigned to a subscriber or activated. So these are the kind of things you can look at, as well as common sense things like, is it a malformed number? Is it not 10 digits in the United States? Or is it a number that's not part of the North American Number Plan? Maybe the NPA is 123 and the NXX is 456 or something like that we know is not following the NAMPA numbering plan. So, we look at things like that. We look at things like if it's a call to a honeypot, perhaps it's a call to a honeypot that is associated with a telephone number that has never been assigned. Now, if we see that happen once, perhaps that's just a mistake. And it might not even be the business itself that is at fault here, so to speak. It could be their BPO operation that maybe made a mistake there. And if we see it once, that could be just a one-off. But if we see a pattern there, that could be indicative of a TCPA violation. Is it definitely a TCPA violation? We don't know. And we don't get into things like are we using an auto dialer? The Supreme Court definition of that made that very narrow. So who knows there? We don't try to guess whether they're doing sequential or random dialing. But again, if we see things like perhaps repeatedly calling honeypots with a never before assigned number, or maybe telephone numbers that are on a do not call list or things like that. From our perspective, what that would prompt us to do is have a conversation with our customer and say, hey, we're seeing this pattern here. You might want to look into this, and then hopefully they take corrective action. If not, then we might need to to take other actions. But I'll just go ahead and leave that slide just to say that there's a variety of different things that we look at there. Now, so why is this important? There's a lot of positive benefits for maintaining a good reputation with your telephone number. The obvious one is higher call answer rates. Because if you don't have a high reputation, then again, it's more likely that it's going to be labeled or even worse, blocked. And again, you could have positive labeling happen in some cases where they're also being blocked, and then maybe even vice versa. So that's why it's really important to look at this data. The other reason why it's really important to maintain positive reputation is just simply to stay on the right side of regulations and compliance, and stray away from things like tracebacks. And also, no one ever wants to get a cease and desist letter. Hopefully, things never get to that level if you're a communication service provider. But these are the kind of things that people want to stay on the right side of. So, from a managing number reputation perspective, it really comes down to three things. And this is a bit of a continuum where first you register your number, and then that number is monitored through services like caller ID reputation. And then there's opportunities for management. I talked about some of those management aspects, looking at the data, correlating the data that you get from analytics providers with what you're seeing on the UI side, like how does it appear at the handset, correlating that together to see if it makes sense, see if there's some action that might need to be taken. And the action that is taken when things aren't coming across the way you want them to is remediation. Now, you can either do that on your own, and there's certainly tools and templates available to do that. We make those available to our customers if they want to do that on a DIY basis. But as I alluded to earlier, we actually have a managed service as well to do that on their behalf, because some companies just don't want to deal with that. They don't have the time or the inclination to do that themselves. But again, I refer to this as a continuum because it's a very dynamic thing, managing telephone number reputation. You can be good one day and then bad the next. And again, it's based on the algorithms. It could be anything from calling patterns, like maybe the number wasn't used very much, and then all of a sudden it's used a lot, and that trips a switch, so to speak, and the number goes from positive reputation to not positive. Or I've seen in the past errors that have occurred where it's a perfectly legitimate business operation that just forgot to do something. They forgot to provide their callback number, and then all of a sudden that FTC TSR example I gave it becomes an issue. So looking beyond telephone numbers and looking beyond reputation, it's really important to consider business identity as a whole. And this is one of the things that we're looking at increasingly at our company, calling ID reputation. We're looking at what are the types of things that would be a concern from a KYC perspective, from an onboarding perspective. That's actually one of the reasons why we look at D&O, for example, do not originate. I'll give you an example. If a customer or a would-be customer comes to us and they try to register a do not originate number, that's going to cause pause for us, where we're going to have a conversation with them and we're going to say, hey, this number is not an allocated number, or it's not an assigned number. It's on the D&O list. Where'd you get this number? And they might have a good story there. They might have a good reason why to have that number, or maybe not. And so what that might do, depending on how that conversation goes, is make us watch that customer much more closely. Or if we get some sense that they're operating in the gray area or dark gray area, that maybe we don't want to have them as a customer. And by the way, as an aside, it's very rare that somebody that registers their telephone number with a service like caller ID reputation is going to be an outright scammer. That's extremely rare, because as we know, the dark hats, they don't want to be noticed. They want to fly under the radar. What's much more apt to happen is those light gray to dark gray areas where maybe it's a telemarketing type issue. So business identity is a lot of other things, and one of the things that we keep track of is some of the developments that are going on from an organizational identity perspective. we're all familiar with stir-shaken as a means of tracking identity at the network and telephone number level, but organizational identity is a new construct, which is keeping track of who owns and controls a telephone number at the business level, at the BPO level. So there's definitely going to be more coming about that, and that'll probably be a future TAD session. But I want to allude to that now because I think that this is something that is important to pay attention to, that we need to focus on more than just the telephone number as a means of vetting the identity of some entity that's going to place a call, and also, quite frankly, providing accountability back to them when things don't go as anticipated. So with identity, there's really three things that we track, and one of them is business identity itself, as I was alluding to just a moment ago, and that's really important from a KYC and onboarding perspective. We also focus on call treatment relative to business identity. If somebody asserts themselves as being a legitimate caller, but how those calls actually come across, and then of course the number reputation that I spoke about earlier. Just to kind of close things out and leave a little bit of time for Q&A, something else that we're looking at very closely, and some of you may have heard, there's some efforts underway to make branded calling a more robust and inclusive marketplace in the United States, and so Caller ID Reputation is working closely to do our part to make that happen. And one of the things that we feel is really important with that is an audit function, which we would provide as part of that ecosystem. The audit function in this context is if you sign up for branded calling, whether that's branded calling light, which could be just as simple as the calling name, or whether it's full-blown RCD whenever that's available, which would be your logo, your reason for call, et cetera, et cetera. Either way, that audit function provides the ability to see if your calls are actually coming across as intended. If you're paying for branded calling because you want your call answer rates to go up or whatever reason you have to improve your ROI, you want to make sure that those are actually coming across to the end users as expected. And so that's one of the services that Caller ID Reputation provides, is basically validating that the branded calling is actually happening as planned. So with that, I am going to see if there's any questions that may have popped up, and leave about a minute or two here for some Q&A.
Excellent, thank you so much, Gerry. A quick, obvious question, Gerry. There seems to be a fair bit of overlap between what you're doing and sort of what the TCR is doing. Is there an overlap between a number that is naughty on calling and naughty with SMS?
There is some overlap. Historically speaking, Caller ID Reputation has focused on voice and voice alone, and to be honest, we are in sort of the baby step stages of focusing on what we do for text messaging reputation, so it's a newer area for us. But yes, there is indeed some overlap. Now, D&O is a really good example, for example, because on the text messaging world, as I understand it, you have to register a telephone number as being text messaging origination enabled.
Yeah.
And by definition, if you don't register it, then it would be a D&O number from an SMS perspective. We don't have quite the same thing on the voice world, but what we do have for D&O is some of the other things I mentioned. Is it an allocated number? Is it a signed number? So there's some overlap there. We do have many of our customers that are asking for both. Many of our existing customers that engage in voice-based campaigns, they also do text messaging, and they ask us, hey, are you going to let us know about the reputation of numbers from a text messaging perspective? And so we are actively and aggressively looking for data partners in that regard to provide that kind of insight to our customers. I think we're going to see more and more of that. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that's good. Any questions from the audience?
Can I have the video? I'll come on. Hi Gerry, can you see me?
I can just see somebody's shirt right in front of the camera.
Don't worry. Okay.
It's me. I'm Kalyan. I'm from moitele.com. This company is based in Finland. We have contact center customers who dial across the world. And one of the problem we face is that calling rates are going down. And I feel synced when with your presentation. I feel you probably have some suggestions or directions for me. So help me understand whether this caller ID reputation management is USA focused or global focused.
Well, first of all, nice to meet you. Thank you very much for your question. I really appreciate it. Today, we are primarily US focused in the sense that the device cloud that I was referring to earlier, we have hundreds of telephones with hundreds of real service plans on major carriers and some smaller carriers. So we've got T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, and some others. And by the way, that device cloud is scaling up to thousands of phones and thousands of service plans. So the primary focus today is whether a call originates within the United States or whether it originates outside the United States. The focus today is primarily providing visibility into what happens when a call that is intended to reach a United States telephone number, what happens with that call. We are working to expand to Canada and Mexico and some other countries as well. But primarily we focus on the United States. Again, that focus is based on what happens when you're trying to reach a United States telephone number. Okay. Does that help answer your question?
Yes. So you're primarily a US based service, and you have also mentioned that it's more relevant when the call also originates with a US number. Am I right?
Correct. So in other words, if your operation, as many CCAS operations, are interested in reaching United States citizens, people that have United States-based numbers, our service would be helpful in that regard because we would be able to let you know when you place a call to these networks, what is the reputation and also how are those calls treated. It could be any number that you use. It could be another United States-based number, or it could be a Canadian-based number, or it could be an Indian-based number, any number. But again, the focus is on you're trying to reach somebody at T-Mobile, or you're trying to reach somebody at Verizon. How is that call treated? How does it appear when you try to reach somebody on Verizon, for example?
Okay, so this part of your answer is very helpful for me because our customers reach the US phones with diverse numbers. Second, you also mentioned that you will remediate, or your company remediates if at all any number is marked as spam or scam or fraud or whatever is it. Now,
correct.
You have mentioned that this remediation, of course, remediation requires interacting with various downstream providers, maybe real number, maybe email, maybe AT&T, maybe T-Mobile. So what is the time span that requires, when you notice something has happened and when you remediate the number?
Well, the time span for remediation being defined as how long does it take to fix something from the time that a request is made or the realization occurs that there is a problem to the time that it's actually fixed. It can vary considerably. In the best cases, it's actually intraday. Within the same day, we can get it fixed. And that would be in cases where that's merited, of course, where we realize that there was definitely an error and we just get it fixed right away. But more typically, I would say within 5 business days is the more typical case. And again, this is based on the diligence that we would do as part of our managed service, where we take a look at the why portion. So that would be looking at the various data that we get from analytics engines, and some of those are event-based and some of those are content-based. The content-based ones, we would be able to see a transcript of what's actually occurred. in the form of the pre-recorded audio, if that happens to be the case. And we take sort of a triage approach. We first rule out, is there anything that looks like overt fraud? Things like brand impersonation, for example. Somebody claiming to be a bank, but it's really not a bank. And so registering telephone numbers is really important in that regard, because if telephone numbers are registered, then you know what telephone numbers actually do belong to the bank. And so if you see a different telephone number where they're claiming to be the bank, it's pretty likely that it's brand impersonation, which is a form of fraud. By the way, sometimes we do require vetting there, and that could cause a delay where we need to actually reach out to the bank and see, is this your legitimate campaign, or is it somebody that's trying to defraud your customers? So that's the first thing we look at, is there outright fraud in the form of impersonation, things like that. We also then look at other unlawful things. If it's not fraud, then we look for, do we think there's a TCPA violation? Do we think that maybe they've, from a telemarketing perspective, they're not following telemarketing sales rules? So if we can rule out those things, then we can discern, well, maybe it's just considered spammy because of crowdsourced feedback. So that's the kind of process that we follow. And if we get to the point where we're confident that mislabeling has occurred, that gives us a lot of ability to go back to the analytics engines, first Ryan High and TNS, for example, and get things changed and get them fixed very expeditiously.
I have the last question.
I'm afraid. But I'll introduce the two of you.
Okay.
I can have a chat.
Sure.
Okay?
And now I'm passing it on to Alan.
That was great, Gerry. I'm sure we do have quite a few more questions, but I'll provide some introductions so you can take that off on one-on-one discussions, okay?
I appreciate that. Thank you. I know I went over. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Again, thank you so much, Gerry. Great presentation.